Gospel Topics Essays, Plural Marriage in Kirtland and Nauvoo, Part 2. In this series, I will thoroughly examine the Gospel Topics essays published on the official LDS Church website. Each essay will be addressed in the order presented by the Church, offering a critical and in-depth analysis of the topics they cover. As the LDS Church continues to break this down into further in-depth articles, I will be exposing their distortions and contradictions in follow-up videos, addressing each point in the order they present it. Since this topic essay is lengthy, I will be breaking it down into a two-part episode. This is part 2 of 2, part 1. Joseph Smith and plural marriage. During the era in which plural marriage was practiced, Latter-day Saints distinguished between sealings for time and eternity and sealings for eternity only. Sealings for time and eternity included commitments and relationships during this life, generally including the possibility of sexual relations. Eternity-only sealings indicated relationships in the next life alone. Evidence indicates that Joseph Smith participated in both types of sealings. The exact number of women to whom he was sealed in his lifetime is unknown because the evidence is fragmentary. Some of the women who were sealed to Joseph Smith later testified that their marriages were for time and eternity, while others indicated that their relationships were for eternity alone. The Church has long peddled the sanitized lie that Joseph Smith's plural marriages were purely spiritual, devoid of physical intimacy, unions of eternity, not the flesh. But as the record makes undeniably clear, that's a blatant falsehood. The Church itself now concedes that several of these marriages were physical, and numerous women during the Temple Lot case outright confirmed it under oath. The evidence is there, and it's damning, and it gets darker. There have long been credible allegations that John C. Bennett, Smith's personal physician and closest ally at the time, was performing secret abortions for Smith and his inner circle to cover up the consequences of these illicit unions. The very fact that such a thing was even rumored in Nauvoo speaks volumes about what was happening behind closed doors. As for the rest of the Church's carefully worded repetitive nonsense, it's irrelevant. We've covered it, we've dismantled it, and it doesn't hold water. Joseph Smith and his hand-picked associates married other men's wives, violated their own theology, and betrayed the very doctrine they claimed to defend. It wasn't spiritual, it was physical. End of story. The Church moves on with. Most of those sealed to Joseph Smith were between 20 and 40 years of age at the time of their sealing to him. The oldest, Fanny Young, was 56 years old. The youngest was Helen Mar Kimball, daughter of Joseph's close friends Heber C. and Violet Murray Kimball, who was sealed to Joseph several months before her 15th birthday. Marriage at such an age, inappropriate by today's standards, was legal in that era, and some women married in their mid-teens. Helen Mar Kimball spoke of her sealing to Joseph as being for eternity alone, suggesting that the relationship did not involve sexual relations. After Joseph's death, Helen remarried and became an articulate defender of him and of plural marriage. The Church is trying to gaslight us once again. It was not unheard of for a 14-year-old to marry out on the frontier or in more urban areas, but it was very rare. The common age of marriage for a white woman in the 1840s was between 22 to 24 years of age. The marriages of Helen Mar Kimball and the other half-dozen minors was not common in Joseph's day, as the LDS Church would wish you to believe. Even Helen, years later, admitted the emotional toll of what she had been pushed into. She wrote, "I would never have been sealed to Joseph had I known it was anything more than a ceremony. It was not a love matter. It was the most difficult trial of my life." After Joseph's death, Helen married Horace Whitney and went on to live within the LDS community, forever marked by the trauma of her coerced sealing. She never practiced plural marriage again. Then we get from the Church. Following his marriage to Louisa Beeman and before he married other single women, Joseph Smith was sealed to a number of women who were already married. Neither these women nor Joseph explained much about these sealings, though several women said they were for eternity alone. Other women left no records, making it unknown whether their sealings were for time and eternity or were for eternity alone. We covered this as well in part 1, so I will only say, if Smith and his associates were marrying other men's wives, Doesn't that mean those men were robbed of their wives in the afterlife? Were they robbed of the ability to have children with their own wives now? How is that righteous? How is that divine? It's utterly selfish, it's predatory, and if you step back and think logically, it's utterly indefensible. Honestly, does it even matter whether these marriages were for time, eternity, or both? The end result is the same. And frankly, if they were for time, it's even more damning, because that means these women were actively committing adultery with church leaders while their husbands were still alive, and those leaders knew exactly what they were doing. Either way, Joseph Smith and his inner circle were openly breaking the law of the land and spitting on the very moral code they preached to everyone else. The church moved on with. There are several possible explanations for this practice. These sealings may have provided a way to create an eternal bond or link between Joseph's family and other families within the church. These ties extended both vertically, from parent to child, and horizontally, from one family to another. Today, such eternal bonds are achieved through the temple marriages of individuals who are also sealed to their own birth families, in this way linking families together. Joseph Smith's sealings to women already married may have been an early version of linking one family to another. In Nauvoo, most if not all of the first husbands seem to have continued living in the same household with their wives during Joseph's lifetime, and complaints about these sealings with Joseph Smith are virtually absent from the documentary record. This is the biggest load of rubbish. For one, the church clearly doesn't know, and resorts to speculative language like may to fill in the gaps. The reality is that Joseph Smith and his associates were marrying women behind their husbands' backs without their knowledge. So how exactly does that qualify as linking families? This is why I referred to it as rubbish. And secondly, if this practice was truly inspired and part of God's plan, why isn't it openly taught or continued today? If early leaders of the church were supposedly doing this to unite families, why did the church distance itself from polygamy by the early 1900s? The truth is, they knew exactly what it was, and when it became a liability, they quietly stepped away from it. The church then states, another possibility is that, in an era when lifespans were shorter than they are today, faithful women felt an urgency to be sealed by priesthood authority. Several of these women were married either to non-Mormons or former Mormons, and more than one of the women later expressed unhappiness in their present marriages. Living in a time when divorce was difficult to obtain, these women may have believed a sealing to Joseph Smith would give them blessings they might not otherwise receive in the next life. The claim that Joseph Smith's sealings to married women were driven by the women's desire for eternal blessings, especially because their husbands were non-members or former members, is not only misleading, it's flat-out historically dishonest. The fact is, several of these women were already married to faithful, active Latter-day Saints, including apostles and missionaries like Orson Hyde and Henry Jacobs. This wasn't about lonely, unprotected women seeking salvation. The majority of these polyandrous marriages were initiated by Joseph Smith himself, often behind closed doors, without the knowledge or consent of the women's husbands. It had nothing to do with marital dissatisfaction or spiritual uncertainty. Worse still, in cases like 14-year-old Helen Mar Kimball, women and girls were promised exaltation for themselves and their entire families in exchange for submission, exposing a clear pattern of spiritual manipulation and coercion, not faith-driven initiative. Attempts to frame these relationships as benevolent or divinely inspired retroactively sanitize one of the most disturbing aspects of early Mormon history, conveniently rewriting events to protect a legacy that can't stand up to honest scrutiny. Part 2. Joseph and Emma. The church opens this section with, plural marriage was difficult for all involved. For Joseph Smith's wife Emma, it was an excruciating ordeal. Records of Emma's reactions to plural marriage are sparse. She left no first-hand accounts, making it impossible to reconstruct her thoughts. Joseph and Emma loved and respected each other deeply. After he had entered into plural marriage, he poured out his feelings in his journal for his beloved Emma, whom he described as undaunted, firm, and unwavering, unchangeable, affectionate Emma. After Joseph's death, Emma kept a lock of his hair in a locket she wore around her neck. Emma approved, at least for a time, of 4 of Joseph Smith's plural marriages in Nauvoo, and she accepted all 4 of those wives into her household. She may have approved of other marriages as well, but Emma likely did not know about all of Joseph's sealings. She vacillated in her view of plural marriage, at some points supporting it and at other times denouncing it. The first paragraph is nothing more than an emotional appeal meant to derail the reader from the real issue. They have no moral ground to stand on here, so instead they resort to distraction tactics and sentimentality to blindside the conversation. It's a classic move when the facts aren't on your side. The claim that records of Emma's reactions to plural marriage are sparse and that it's impossible to reconstruct her thoughts is an outright fabrication. It's a deliberate attempt to erase inconvenient history. We do have Emma's own words, including an 1860 letter to her son, Joseph Smith III, where she makes her feelings unmistakably clear. Beyond that, we have damning accounts from William Law in the Nauvoo Expositor and his 1887 interviews, as well as testimonies from close friends and associates of Emma herself. The picture is anything but vague. We can absolutely reconstruct Emma's feelings on polygamy, and the historical record shows she was devastated, betrayed, and furious over Joseph's secret marriages. The church isn't confused about this. They're lying. They're counting on members not reading the original sources and instead accepting carefully curated narratives. This isn't about missing records. It's about willful deception. As for the second paragraph, it's flat out false. The historical record is clear. Joseph Smith married several young women already living and working in his home before Emma ever gave even temporary consent to plural marriage. And when Emma did reluctantly agree to the idea for a brief time, Joseph had already secretly married those same women months earlier. He even staged a sham wedding ceremony when Emma approved the marriage of the Partridge sisters, who had, in reality, already been sealed to him in secret. And it didn't stop there. He also secretly married 17-year-old Lucy Walker, who was living under their roof without Emma's knowledge. These weren't isolated misunderstandings or benevolent spiritual unions. This was calculated deception. The church closes this section with, "The revelation on marriage required that a wife give her consent before her husband could enter into plural marriage. Nevertheless, toward the end of the revelation, the Lord said that if the first wife received not this law, the command to practice plural marriage, the husband would be exempt from the law of Sarah, presumably the requirement that the husband gain the consent of the first wife before marrying additional women." After Emma opposed plural marriage, Joseph was placed in an agonizing dilemma, forced to choose between the will of God and the will of his beloved Emma. He may have thought Emma's rejection of plural marriage exempted him from the law of Sarah. Her decision to receive not this law permitted him to marry additional wives without her consent. Because of Joseph's early death and Emma's decision to remain in Nauvoo and not discuss plural marriage after the church moved west, many aspects of their story remain known only to the two of them. Once again, this false. Joseph had married Fanny Alger in 1835 behind Emma's back and was caught. Joseph married several women before Emma's consent during the Nauvoo era, racking up 29 wives in total before July 12, 1843, D&C 132 Polygamy Revelation. In reality, the law of Sarah was introduced in 1843 as part of D&C 132, suggesting the first wife should give consent for plural marriage. But Joseph Smith had already broken that principle, and church leaders quickly sidelined it. By the time plural marriage was public in Utah, the law of Sarah was functionally dead, ignored in both doctrine and practice. Add in, God never commanded Sarah to give Hagar to Abraham, nor did he command Abraham to take her. It was Sarah's idea, and Abraham agreed, not a divine commandment. Part 3. Trial and Spiritual Witness. The church leads off with, years later in Utah, participants in Nauvoo plural marriage discussed their motives for entering into the practice. God declared in the Book of Mormon that monogamy was the standard. At times, however, he commanded plural marriage so his people could raise up seed unto him. Plural marriage did result in an increased number of children born to believing parents. Some saints also saw plural marriage as a redemptive process of sacrifice and spiritual refinement. According to Helen Mar Kimball, Joseph Smith stated that the practice of this principle would be the hardest trial the saints would ever have to test their faith. Though it was one of the severest trials of her life, she testified that it had also been one of the greatest blessings. Her father, Heber C. Kimball, agreed. "I never felt more sorrowful," he said of the moment he learned of Pelply. Yes, Helen Mar Kimball publicly defended polygamy in church publications like The Woman's Exponent, but don't confuse public loyalty with private peace. Her defenses weren't personal affirmations of joy or fulfillment. They were doctrinal justifications, rehearsed to align with the church's narrative. She did what many 19th century Latter-day Saint women were pressured to do, outwardly promote a system that privately shattered them. Helen herself admitted the truth beneath the surface. She wrote, "I would never have been sealed to Joseph had I known it was anything more than a ceremony. It was not a love matter. It was the most difficult trial of my life." That doesn't sound like a woman uplifted by divine principle. It sounds like a young girl coerced into a situation she neither wanted nor understood, then expected to publicly pretend it was a blessing. Like countless others, she lived the brutal double standard of Mormon polygamy. Praise it in public, suffer in silence. The church moves on with. The decision to accept such a wrenching trial usually came only after earnest prayer and intense soul-searching. Brigham Young said that, upon learning of plural marriage, it was the first time in my life that I had desired the grave. "I had to pray unceasingly," he said, "and I had to exercise faith, and the Lord revealed to me the truth of it, and that satisfied me." Heber C. Kimball found comfort only after his wife Vilate had a visionary experience attesting to the rightness of plural marriage. "She told me," Vilate's daughter later recalled, "she never saw so happy a man as father was when she described the vision and told him she was satisfied and knew it was from God." This is the kind of carefully curated folklore the church has used for generations to sanitize the brutality of polygamy. The idea that men like Brigham Young and Heber C. Kimball wrestled so nobly and prayerfully with plural marriage is a convenient narrative designed to humanize what was, at its core, an exploitative and coercive practice, one that overwhelmingly benefited the men demanding it, while devastating the women expected to quietly submit. Yes, Brigham Young claimed he desired the grave upon hearing about polygamy. But let's be clear, despite that supposed horror, he went on to marry over 50 women, including young teenagers, and eventually used his power to enforce and expand the system. So spare us the weepy anecdotes about his inner torment. As for Heber C. Kimball, the claim that his wife Vilate had a vision conveniently confirming plural marriage is another classic example of retroactive spiritual validation, a tool commonly used by early church leaders to neutralize resistance within their own homes. It's easy to believe in a vision when your survival, reputation, and eternal salvation are all hanging in the balance of obedience to men like Joseph Smith and Brigham Young. And let's not forget the obvious. While the men agonized in prayer, the women were the ones forced to live it. The church proceeds with, Lucy Walker recalled her inner turmoil when Joseph Smith invited her to become his wife. "Every feeling of my soul revolted against it," she wrote. Yet, after several restless nights on her knees in prayer, she found relief as her room filled with a holy influence, akin to brilliant sunshine. She said, "My soul was filled with a calm, sweet peace that I never knew, and supreme happiness took possession of my whole being." Not all had such experiences. Some Latter-day Saints rejected the principle of plural marriage and left the church, while others declined to enter the practice but remained faithful. Nevertheless, for many women and men, initial revulsion and anguish was followed by struggle, resolution, and ultimately light and peace. Sacred experiences enabled the saints to move forward in faith. Let's cut through the sugar-coated nonsense and set the record straight about Lucy Walker. She was 17 years old, a teenager, living under the same roof as Joseph Smith after her father was sent away on a mission. Joseph held total control over her life and circumstances, and like clockwork, he deployed the same manipulative, self-serving tactic he used on other young girls: spiritual coercion disguised as divine commandment. He gave Lucy 3 days to decide if she would become one of his secret plural wives, threatening her eternal salvation in the process. In Lucy's own words, Smith warned, "You must decide for yourself. I will give you until tomorrow to decide this matter. If you reject this message, the gate will be closed forever against you." This isn't romantic. This isn't faith-promoting. This is spiritual blackmail, plain and simple. A prophet claiming to speak for God, cornering a vulnerable teenage girl with the threat of eternal damnation if she refused his marriage proposal. Part 4, Conclusion. The Church closes this essay off with, "The challenge of introducing a principle as controversial as plural marriage is almost impossible to overstate. A spiritual witness of its truthfulness allowed Joseph Smith and other Latter-day Saints to accept this principle. Difficult as it was, the introduction of plural marriage in Nauvoo did indeed raise up seed unto God. A substantial number of today's members descend through faithful Latter-day Saints who practiced plural marriage. Church members no longer practice plural marriage. Consistent with Joseph Smith's teachings, the Church permits a man whose wife has died to be sealed to another woman when he remarries. Moreover, members are permitted to perform ordinances on behalf of deceased men and women who married more than once on earth, sealing them to all of the spouses to whom they were legally married. The precise nature of these relationships in the next life is not known, and many family relationships will be sorted out in the life to come. Latter-day Saints are encouraged to trust in our wise Heavenly Father, who loves His children and does all things for their growth and salvation. Claiming the Church no longer practices polygamy, while conveniently glossing over the fact that it still doctrinally exists in LDS theology, is dishonest. Men are still permitted to be sealed to multiple women for eternity, both in life and by proxy after death, while women are restricted to one eternal spouse. That's not sorting things out in the next life. That's perpetuating inequality baked directly into the Church's eternal framework. The idea that these eternal relationships will be tidied up by a wise Heavenly Father is a convenient way to avoid accountability for a doctrine the Church still quietly sustains in its sealing policies today. If polygamy was so divinely essential in the 1800s, why did it require lies, secrecy, and public denials? And if it's still doctrinally endorsed for eternity, why keep pretending it's a relic of the past? History deserves to be faced honestly, not buried under faith-promoting platitudes and carefully worded half-truths. Thank you so kindly for watching. This is the Ex-Mormon Informant signing off for today.